integrity because a lot of people would think, well, in terms of development, that the most important things are external developments. So we develop buildings, we develop infrastructures, we develop technology, while forgetting those which are related to character, internal development. That's what we call it. And a lot of things are missed out simply because we fail to acknowledge the importance of character. And one of the things that we need to understand is the importance of integrity. Now, before we continue with the importance of integrity, allow me first to define integrity. So I looked it up at the dictionary, and these are the things that I found at the web as meanings for integrity. The first one is the quality of being honest and having strong moral principles or moral uprightness. The second one is the practice of being honest and showing a consistent and uncompromising adherence to strong moral and ethical principles and values. In ethics, integrity is regarded as the honesty and truthfulness or accuracy of one's actions. So if we try to elaborate on this meaning, we will find several things. Number one is the need for a standard, because it talks about a moral principle. In fact, I was looking at the history of traffic on EDSA. I don't know if you've experienced that lately. I'm sure that because of lack of transportation, particularly airlines, some of you have not experienced the difficulty that we're having right now here in Metro Manila. I remember the days when they tried to prevent pedestrians from crossing EDSA. So you would see all kinds of weird and strange signages that they had to put up just to prevent people from crossing the street and use the proper crossing paths, which are the overpass and in some cases, the underpasses. Now, what is interesting is at first, they wrote there, they had a placard or a billboard that says, "Bawal tumawid." But people kept on crossing, and then later on, they had to change that. And what they placed on instead is, "Bawal tumawid, nakamamatay." But still, people kept on crossing. So they had to revise it again, and they came up with this, "Bawal tumawid, may namatay na rito." And apparently, it did not stop people from crossing the street. That's the problem. So my point in saying that is oftentimes we see a lot of these signages. And I think as far as reminders, signages are concerned, we have plenty of them. But the problem with people is that we do not adhere to a particular standard. And that is causing a lot of problems for all of us. In fact, if you look at it on a personal level, your life will suffer if you do not have integrity. Look at it on a level of society. We look at people with very high influence, high position. But the problem is sometimes, not all of them, but for some, because they do not have integrity, instead of using their influence, their power to improve the situation, they contribute further to the deterioration of our situation. And a lot of us are suffering simply because of this. So again, we cannot undermine the significance of integrity. So when you look at this, we will see the importance of a standard, but not only that, the importance of adhering to that standard. By the first one alone, there is confusion because there are so many moral standards nowadays. In fact, I'm also teaching a lot of materials on parenting. And one of the things that we keep telling parents is that you make sure that you set the right moral standards. Because the problem nowadays with the abundance of resources from the internet, and we have people whom we term as influencers, not because they are educated in a particular field, but because they have so many followers, likers, and subscribers to their social media accounts. And by virtue of their popularity, they became influencers. Now, the problem with that is it increased the number of moral principles in society, and many of them are not really moral principles which are tested and moral principles that are reliable. And some of them even question the traditional moral principles which are tried and tested. So that's the problem. We have a confusion as far as moral principles are concerned. So that's the first struggle. The second one is related, the second struggle is related to the second issue. And the second issue is adherence to these moral principles. Now, it's difficult to establish a moral principle, and it is also another issue when it comes to adhering to these moral principles, because we have a society that seemingly condones those who are undisciplined. I remember seeing a comparison between Japan and the Philippines in light of calamities, and they showed that Japan experiences a lot of earthquakes and calamities in a period of 1 year. And according to that particular article, they showed the before and after. They showed people lining up just to get financial aid or food or material provisions. They are willing to line up, with long lines just to wait for their turns. In the Philippines, we invent our own lines. In fact, just the other day, it was very difficult to get home. I think some of you, if you've been listening to Metro Manila News, you know the issue of the RFID in the expressway. And it's really such a huge problem. I was trying to go home the other day. I think it was last Wednesday. And I was stuck inside the expressway for the simple reason that aside from the usual traffic, you have 2 lanes, but the problem is, people have converted the 2 lanes into 3 and 3.5 lanes. So aside from the slow progress of movement, you also have a lot of people trying to get your space. So in the process, you go home, you end up being so stressed simply because people do not comply with a standard. So we create our own standards. What is more important is convenience rather than conformity to a very important rule or regulation. So we suffer because of that. And later on, we will talk about the challenges of not having integrity. But let me just cite 4 things related to integrity that I would say are very important to keep in mind. Number 1, it adds value to self. When you have integrity, you increase your value. I remember a particular car brand, Ford. It's one of the oldest and one of the most popular car brands. But there is a point in history, I think it was in the early 30s, that they were able to, they noticed that there was something problematic with one of the parts of their car. And what they had to do was send letters, and before it was not email, of course, it was snail mail. That's what we refer to it today. And they have these postcards. And according to that particular article, Ford paid $500,000 US, okay? $500,000 US, not to replace the parts, but just for postal stamps alone. So you can imagine the amount of money that was spent to send out the letters and the amount of money that was spent to repair the cars for free. And they had to do it because they had to protect the brand name. And now, of course, we see Ford as a thriving company still, despite the long years of existence. And the reason for that is because they tried to protect the company. Of course, so many imperfections, but the bottom line is, if you have integrity, it adds value to self. Secondly, it also brings benefits to others. It benefits other people. Nowadays, when we have calamities, in fact, we have heard of some major anomalies in government, particularly related to the health sector. Okay, I would not wish to mention, but we have heard of that in the news. Of course, investigation is still ongoing, but the bottom line is we're not blaming everybody in that particular department. But what we are saying is it affects people. When we have anomalies and scams and scandals in certain high positions, it affects everyone. But at the same time, nowadays, we've noticed that if we have leaders in local governments, for example, I think this pandemic has been a way to show the skills and the character of our LGUs. And I think in Metro Manila, we could cite several cities where we have very much outstanding local government officials. You see the benefit it brings to the constituents. That's why integrity is important. It does not only add value to self, it brings benefits to others. Thirdly, it creates mutual trust. So when you have integrity, the issue of trust is resolved, and that improves personal relationships. It improves business relationships. I know that some of you later on are planning to put up your own business or probably your own company or work in a particular institution. Understand that integrity is important. I learned this from a church member. He was almost 80 years old, but the company refuses to let him go. He was way past retirement age, and the company said, "We cannot let you go. Please stay with us. We will give you appropriate compensation for all your troubles." You know, he wanted to quit the job, and there are so many who can replace him, but the company still settles for him. And you know why? He is old as compared to the younger ones who can do probably more because of their young age and energy. They have technical skills which this older person probably does not have. And the reason why they want to retain him in that trusted position is simply because he is known as a man of integrity. So you see, it increases your value. It expands your opportunities. It gives you a brighter horizon when you have integrity. Because skills, if you have skills, year after year, people graduate with better skills, with updated skills, and with probably better knowledge. But if you lack this character, if you lack integrity, the problem is you lose your market value. So understand that integrity plus skills, it lifts up your market value. Okay, people will prefer you over the others simply because of this very important trait that you possess. And the number 4, it develops an atmosphere of growth. You would want to stay in a company where they exercise integrity. You would want to stay in a particular institution where integrity is fostered because you grow in that particular company. So it's truly beneficial. Now, let's just try to go over some popular definition of integrity. Let me show you some things that were mentioned about integrity. One is wisdom is knowing the right path to take, and integrity is taking it. So what I like about this statement is that it separates knowing what to do and actually doing it. So knowing what to do is one thing, and implementing it is another thing. So we have to understand that it's not enough to know the right thing to do. The challenge is to actually be able to do it. And that is integrity, that we do what we know to be right. And then another thing, and this is very nice, integrity is choosing your thoughts and actions based on values rather than personal gain. I think this is a problem nowadays that a lot of people, they think of what they can gain personally instead of basing their decision on values. So what motivates them is money, earnings, opportunities instead of values. When you talk about integrity, it's very important to keep in mind that we focus more on the values that we adhere to, and we make sure that we stay within the boundaries of that, the values that we believe in. And then another thing, this is also nice, to have integrity means to hold yourself to a high standard of doing the things you say regardless of circumstances or feeling. I think this is a challenge for all of us because from time to time, emotions get the best of us, right? In decision making, a lot of people, especially the younger ones, would struggle between puso and utak. Ano daw ba ginagamit? Isip o puso? You know, sometimes these trivial things, we look down on them, but the reality is a lot of people actually struggle with it, and some people actually make decisions based on emotions. That's why if you look at the productivity level of some people, the problem is instead of being productive, they are being controlled by their emotions. So when they don't feel like doing something, they won't do it. Or sometimes, pag nasira na yung mood nila, nagalit sa isang tao, galit na sa lahat. So in the process, instead of being productive and seeing the benefits of productivity, what happens is we get controlled and overcome by emotions, and not only do we produce relationships which are not conducive for growth, the problem is we are also not being productive. So again, this is very important. So you have to ask yourself, do I continue with the high level of quality in what I do, regardless of how I feel? Okay? Because it's not your emotion that should control your output, it should be your values. You stick to your values despite what you're going through emotionally. And that is very important. And it takes maturity to develop that. Another thing is this: integrity is not something you show others, it is how you behave behind their back. I like this one, okay? Because it's not about, you know, what we show others. I think there is a word in the Bible that describes this situation. They call it hypocrisy, right? They seek to improve their appearance before people, but they fail to develop their character. That's what it means. And if you try to research the original meaning of the word hypocrite, it basically means an actor or actress, somebody who is pretending to be somebody else. Okay? So I think this is very important because society needs people with integrity. How you behave behind their back will determine your integrity level. Okay, so how do you behave in front of other people, and how do you behave behind their back? I think as a pastor for several years now, I've learned that there are certain words, when they are used in a particular sentence, would show a not so pleasant conversation. At isa na po doon is atin-atin lang. Yan. Whenever I hear that statement, para bang at the back of my mind, I could not believe na atin-atin lang. Parang sa isip mo is ikaw at kalahati ng mundo nakakaalam. Okay? So that's the problem with that particular statement. Sometimes I find it very difficult to believe that the person sharing some confidential things with me would really keep it to the two of us. Okay? And then of course, nandyan din yung issue na sometimes it's easier to tell other people about the negative traits of, you know, other people instead of coming to them and telling them their problem. There is a verse in the book of Proverbs that relates to this one, and it says, kisses or wounds from an enemy, wounds from a friend are better than kisses from an enemy. So wounds from a friend are better than kisses from an enemy, and it's true. Sometimes we appreciate the praise that is given to us by enemies, but if they lack sincerity, then it's worthless. We would rather be wounded by a friend who is truly concerned by telling us our real problems and what's wrong with us, rather than be praised for things that are not really considered true. So it's a challenge. And then another thing is this one. Integrity is the courage to do right regardless of consequences and the inconveniences. I think this is very significant nowadays. Sometimes because we want to facilitate a faster transaction, instead of sticking to the traditional way of doing things, we try to speed it up by, you know, in Filipino, we call it giving padulas, okay? And when that happens, it creates a culture where having integrity becomes more and more difficult. Let me share with you an experience that I had during the time that I was still flying. No? I used to fly airplanes and helicopters. And when I was taking my ground school and about to take my initial flight training, I remember going to Recto here in Manila, because in Recto you can buy a lot of good flight suits. So we use military flight suits for our training, and the reason for that is safety because of the material of the flight suits. It's fire retardant. Anyway, so I went to Recto, and I was not aware of how much a flight suit is, so I ended up using all my money. Okay, I think I just got a few hundred left. Okay, so but the problem is this: it's not about the flight suit. When I was headed home, what happened was I was trying to cross a particular intersection. Now the problem is when the light was still green. So green basically means go, right? Now, and red, of course, definitely stop. The problem is there was a jeepney that stopped halfway across the intersection just to take in a passenger. So what happened was the car behind him, it was a taxi, and then I was at the back of that particular taxi. So we all stopped almost in the middle of the intersection. Okay, too late to go back and too late to go in front when the light changes. The problem was it was a red light. So instead of going, he stopped. When it turned red, he decided to go. Okay, so the problem was he reversed the rules. So instead of moving at the green light, he stopped. And instead of stopping at the green light, instead of going in the green light, he stopped. And instead of doing the opposite, that was the situation. So what happened was the taxi driver in front of me got caught, and I also got caught. Okay, so the police came up to me, and he told me that I violated the simple rule of not following traffic lights. So I said, okay, so what do I do? And he said, give me your license. So I gave him everything. In fact, I was a new driver back then. So I gave him my license. I gave him the documents of the car. He was actually inside the car by that time. And little did I know that that was illegal. But he forced himself inside the car. So he was transacting. But I did not know. But anyway, he said to me, there is a better way to do this. Instead of you attending a seminar for delinquent drivers and paying at the same time, why not just ticket? And he kept on convincing me to pay him. So he held out, a lot of licenses that he was able to confiscate that day for violators. And then he told me, tutuluyan na kita, kasama ka na rito. I don't mind. Please issue a ticket. And later on, he failed to convince me. He finally asked me this question, ba't ayaw mo magbayad? Mas madali nga dito, magbabayad ka rin doon. Sabi ko sa kanya, pasensya na po, pastor po ako eh. Sabi niya, saan ang church mo? Sinabi ko yung location ng church. And then later on, I was surprised. Sabi nung police, okay, ito na yung license mo. He gave me back my license without asking for any money. And then ang sabi niya sa akin, pagpatuloy mo lang ang pagtuturo mo, and then ito yung nakakatawa. Sabi niya, ipag-pray mo na lang yung masasama. I almost placed my hand on his shoulders and asked him, tara, let's pray. Okay? Because sabi niya, pag-pray ko daw yung masasama. So you notice that sometimes when we lack integrity, we inconvenience other people and we create a culture that is full of moral chaos. So we will have a lot of struggles. That's why integrity is important, regardless of consequences and inconveniences. Not only that, when you look at integrity, it also affects our reputation. Reputation is very important. We have seen several brands throughout history that came and that disappeared. Those with integrity have a means to survive. Okay, they actually get retained in the head of people. People remember them. People appreciate those products, and they become the preferred product whenever you choose to purchase. So it affects reputation. So now that we saw the importance of integrity, let's try to understand how we can develop integrity. As our title shows, how do we develop this, or how to become a man or woman of integrity? Let's first look at the Bible's definition of integrity. It's interesting because in the Old Testament, the Hebrew word for that basically means the condition of being without blemish. Can you imagine that? Being without blemish, or completeness, perfection, sincerity, soundness, uprightness, or wholeness. Okay, so it's a very high standard. When you have integrity, you are placing yourself on a very high standard. In the New Testament, it's much simpler, but of course, the Old Testament was written in Hebrew, the New Testament in Greek, and the word in the New Testament, the Greek word, basically means honesty or adherence to a pattern of good works. So it does not only refer to what you believe, it refers to how you live out what you believe. So again, focusing on the practical application, not just the know-how or the knowledge, but the practical application. Now, how does a relationship with God, or how does your spiritual life contribute to the development of integrity? We always believe that the spiritual life is the foundation of life. When something is lacking in your spiritual life, the way you run your life will be problematic because there is no particular standard to follow, or if you do have a standard, most likely it's a shaky standard. And secondly, the ability to stay within the bounds of that particular standard. So let's look at how our relationship with God helps contribute in the development of integrity. Number one, in Christ, we are new creations and can be considered without blemish before God. So our status before God, regardless of what people say, is different from, how people perceive us. In 2 Corinthians 5:17, the Bible tells us the old has gone and the new has come. So basically, God is giving us not only forgiveness, but a fresh start and the ability to start anew. So it's not just giving you a new opportunity, but He's also giving you the ability to continue in a life that would please Him. I remember several instances in the Bible, and I would just like to cite one. If you go to John chapter 8, there was this woman who was caught in adultery. And the Old Testament say you have to stone that woman until she dies. That was a difficult punishment. It's a painful death. But you know what Jesus said to the woman? Has anyone condemned you? Because Jesus said to the crowd who was about to throw stones at the woman, He said, let him who is without sin throw the first stone. And nobody did throw the stone. So Jesus, after that, asked the woman, has anyone condemned you? And she replied, no one, sir. And Jesus said, neither do I condemn you. Go now and live your life of sin. So this woman was not only given forgiveness for her past actions, but he was given freedom in the present and a possibility of a better future because of the presence of God in her life. So this is what God offers to us. Secondly, in Christ, we also have the indwelling Holy Spirit at work in us, sanctifying us and making us more like Christ, more like Jesus. This is very important because sometimes when a standard is presented to you and you don't have the ability to meet the standard, it amounts to nothing. I was a part of a microfinance group, okay? Not part of the organization, but part of the consultants, okay, for moral development. And what got my attention is their experience in the field. You see, they have a huge operation all over the Philippines. And according to them, they started with one letter C. And what is that? That is capital. Okay, so capital is the money they lend to people so people can start businesses and improve their lives. Okay, but what they notice is that even if people are given money or capital as a starting point, they still do not become successful. So they added another letter C. And what is the second letter C? Competence. Okay, so you have capital or the money needed to start a business. Secondly is competence. According to them, and this was very interesting, and I think you would prove this to be true, according to them, pag ang Pilipino daw, binigyan mo ng puhunan, in most cases, okay, especially sa mga yung talagang rural areas, ang kanilang gagawing negosyo ay sari-sari store. Okay? And I see that dito sa amin. I live at the outskirts of Metro Manila, not really rural, but you can say suburban. But the bottom line is, tabi-tabi yung mga sari-sari store. And sometimes you ask the question, no, paano kaya kumikita ito? Dahil tabi-tabi silang lahat. And that's typical, no, of Filipino community. So sabi nila, capital is not enough. We have to train people to become competent in their particular field of business. So they developed a program that would help people understand business, how to improve business, and how to make business proposals, and what businesses to consider. So they gave them competence. Still, they noticed that despite the capital that they provide and the competence that they gave to people through the trainings, there was still something lacking. So they added a third component, and this is where some of us pastors came in. This is character. Because they cited a particular instance where an old client, okay, she was able to build her business. She was very successful. In fact, she was already supplying some of the international brands in the province. So that's how big her operation was. So she had competence, she had the capital. In fact, she paid several times, several cycles. And when you do that, you are entitled to a bigger loan. So she had a bigger loan. So she had competence and she had the capital. But what was the problem? The problem was she was addicted to gambling. She had gambling issues. So she gambled all her money, including, the money she's using for business. And because of that, she went down. Okay? And they said, Pastor, it's not enough that we give them capital. It's not enough that we train them with competence. It's important that they understand the value of character. And this is what I'm trying to say. What is important right now is not only that we know the path to take, but we need the ability to go there. And this is where the Holy Spirit is very important, because He moves in our lives. In Philippians chapter 2, verse 13, the Bible tells us it is God who gives us the desire to do what is right and the ability to do what pleases God. So the desire and the ability are both important, because if you have the desire but not the ability, you cannot implement. If you have the ability but not the desire, you also cannot implement. So ability and desire are very important. Okay, so that's what the Holy Spirit does in our lives. And then thirdly, it is by God's power that we become increasingly people of integrity. We are called to obey God. So there is a standard. Okay, the more we read the Bible, the more we understand that standard, the more we are familiarized with that standard, and the more we are reminded of that standard. And not only that, He does not only remind us of a particular standard, but because of Jesus, we are enabled to fulfill that standard. So Christians should be those who adhere to the truth and who do good works. In other words, it's not just doctrine, that came into our minds and that we embrace. It's not just a creed, it's a way of life. So when you have a relationship with God, that's what it does to you. Okay, let's try to understand further. Integrity, this is now the challenge. Integrity in our world today implies moral incorruptibility. Now, we struggle with this. Okay, why? For the simple reason that we live in a world where people, try to use immorality to earn, and not only that, they do not adhere to a particular standard, and they have created a society that makes it difficult for people who want to live upright lives to thrive. I have met several business people, Christian business people, and some of them actually tell me, Pastor, it's impossible to do business properly. Some people believe that. But on the other hand, I've also met some Christian businessmen, business people, who tell me that the key to being successful in not only in business, but also in honoring God, is making sure that you adhere to God's moral principles. So what they're saying is that it's not only possible to survive in business with a moral standard, but it is also possible to thrive in business. Because according to them, once you follow the path, okay, of moral decay. In other words, natuto ka na maglagay, magsuhol. Pag yan na yung way of life mo, the problem is this: you will now be in a trap. Okay? You will now be in a moral decline. And the more you do it, the frequency of when you do it complicates the situation. And that is the reason why when once you try to do it the wrong way, you establish a weak foundation, and when that foundation is weak, eventually you'll find yourself struggling all the time just to cover up for the mistake that you did before. So it's better to do it right. So as Christians, this is what the Bible tells us. One, a Christian should be those who cannot be bribed or compromised because we serve God rather than men. In the Bible, we have seen this. People who were given the option to turn their backs on God's moral principles or serve God and glorify God. And they have chosen to honor God. You know why? Because at the end of the day, it's not about how much money you earn. At the end of the day, it's about your accountability before God. Accountability before God. No matter how much you earn, you will be accountable before God. And the goal of a Christian is not just to earn money. The foremost goal is to please God. I remember doing a Bible study in one big business here in Metro Manila. Their business is an international business, and it's Manila-based, and it's owned by a Filipino and started as a Filipino company. Now it's an international brand. And you know, when you enter the halls of that particular company, just the reception hall, you would see there the company's mission and vision. They sell a particular product that you use daily. But you know what? In their mission and vision statement, there is no mention of their product. It says there, the goal of this company is to glorify God. The goal of the company is to glorify God. So they hold themselves to that standard. They see business as a means to please God. Okay? They see business as a means to worship God. So they are held to a higher standard. And some people who struggle with moral uprightness, they are very short-sighted simply because they focus more on what they can earn rather than their accountability before God. And those who succeed in glorifying God eventually find themselves also thriving in their business, but not only because they have lived upright lives, but simply because they also have the favor of the Lord upon them. And it adds to the increase in their stature. Next to that is we are to be people who keep our word. You know, in the book of Matthew, it's interesting because it tells us, let your yes be yes and your no be no. Okay? It's as simple as that. Sometimes we complicate the situation and people get confused, but the standards are simple. Next, we are to love those around us in both word and deed. What is the relationship between integrity and loving people around us? It's simple. You cannot sincerely love those around you if you do not have integrity, because if you love them, you will stick to a moral standard that will not only benefit self, but will also benefit other people. That's why this is important. Okay, number 4. We are called upon to believe in God and therefore to follow Him in all our ways. So integrity is adhering to a standard, and that standard is the moral standard of God. I remember during the my transition from ground school to actual flying, what's interesting is that I had good grades in navigation. I enjoyed navigation in my ground school, and I really loved, you know, looking at maps and trying to locate places. But it's totally different when you transition from ground school to actual flight and to navigate on the plane than on the ground. Okay, it's different. Okay, now I remember we were not allowed initially to use instruments because my instructor, flight instructor, was very particular with us learning how to fly the aircraft, just in case there were no electronics functioning properly. So we had to use the map. And you know what? From time to time, you have to check the map. You're allowed to use the compass, definitely, and you have to check if you're right on your direction. And this is very important. From time to time, we have to also check our moral compass to make sure that we are headed the right direction. And then another thing, our lives should line up with our belief in God and an evidence of trust that His ways are best. So, in other words, that our lives would not only show what we believe, but also there is an alignment with God's purposes. That's very important. Now, let me just challenge you with a passage from the New Testament before we wrap things up. Living with integrity in a world where the corrupt seem favored, not to mention our battle with our own sinful nature, is challenging. Now, if you're feeling the challenge, if you're thinking, how can we do this, Pastor? This is impossible. Or probably some of you are saying, you will not succeed if you do this. Now, let me challenge you. Our goal, again, is not just to run a business. Some of you later on, you know, you will become influential. Some of you are right now very influential. Some of you will have your own businesses. Some of you will be heads of companies or will be positioned in different aspects of companies. The challenge for all of us is to understand that the ultimate boss is God Himself. He is our ultimate boss. In other words, the goal is not just to serve in the company and serve well. The goal is to glorify God. When you look at it from that perspective, you will see that your work, your business, or whatever you do is just an opportunity for you to honor God. Look at the reminders from the book of 1 Peter chapter 3. Now, let me read through this and try to give you some pointers from the verses. It says in chapter 3, verse 13, "Now who will want to harm you if you are eager to do good?" Verse 14, "But even if you suffer for doing what is right, God will reward you for it. So don't worry or be afraid of their threats." 15, "Instead, you must worship Christ as Lord of your life. And if someone asks you about your hope as a believer, always be ready to explain it." Now, this is a good passage to remember. It reminds us, number one, you will have less enemies if you do what is good, right? In fact, I think sometimes the enemies that you will develop are people who are not doing good, okay, because they're affected by your good behavior. I remember a friend of mine who was awarded with several rights to put up a gasoline station of a well-known brand here in Laguna. And kumpare ko siya. He told me, even if you have lots and lots of money, but if the company decides not to give you, okay, a franchise, okay, the final say is with them. And he said a lot of people have applied and they failed. And they were awarded, I think, with 3 or 5 franchises. And they were highly favored by the company. You know why? Because they stuck to the rules. And a lot of people called him and said, you should not report the right quantities that you order, because when you do that, we look bad. Because from that standard that you set, we fall short. And he said, well, that's not my problem. That's your problem. I'm doing the right thing. And because of that, he was highly favored. Okay, so the verse proves to be true. And this is another very important reminder. Even if you suffer for doing what is right, God will reward you for it. So look beyond what people can do and focus, on the favor of God instead of the favor of men. And then not only that, verse 16, "But do this in a gentle and respectful way. Keep your conscience clear. Then if people speak against you," look at this, "if people speak against you, they will be ashamed when they see what a good life you live, because you belong to Christ." Okay, you do not have to answer to your bashers. Okay, people will always have reason to bash you, to say things against you. But when you live a life that is pleasing before God, you don't have to even consider what they say, because at the end of the day, the way you live will be a rebuke to all of them. And then verse 17, "Remember," this is a very important passage, "remember, it is better to suffer for doing good, if that is what God wants, than to suffer for doing wrong." In this world, if you do wrong, you will suffer. If you do good, you will also suffer because of people who do wrong. But again, the Bible reminds us it's better to suffer for doing what is good. Now, so how do we develop integrity? I would like you to look at integrity as the tip of the iceberg. What sustains that integrity? Several things that I would like to highlight among many things. Okay, number one, it starts with a relationship with God. I got married about 11 years ago. So we just recently celebrated our 11th year anniversary. And one of the things that my wife did, I was looking for my wallet, it's not here. She placed a picture of herself. And later on, when we had our first child, our daughter, she took a picture of us and then placed the picture inside my wallet. I said to myself, it was a nice gesture because my wife is so sweet. So every time I look at my wallet, open my wallet, I see their picture. So I was happy. But later on, I had a very strange feeling every time I open my wallet. And probably you're wondering why. Because sometimes I go to some companies, and instead of going home here in Bulacan, which is very distant from some of the places I go to, I just stay in a mall to have lunch or rest there and then continue with other things that I do while in the in Manila. So bottom line is, instead of going home and going again through the traffic, I just stay somewhere else. And sometimes, you know, when you get hungry, you go to a particular burger place, and then I look at the pictures and I said, I want that big burger. But when I open my wallet, I see their picture. And, you know, I remember my child telling me, Daddy, I want that toy from that particular fast food chain. So instead of buying myself a huge burger and a huge drink, I would end up usually eating kiddie meal or happy meal for the sake of the toy that my daughter wants. So what's the relationship with what I'm saying? The point is this: because my relationship with them is important, the way I make my decisions is shaped by that relationship. So when you have a relationship with God, the way you make decisions, your ambitions will always be aligned with God's will. And because of that, you develop integrity. Secondly, stewardship. How do you manage your resources? Okay, it's important because in most cases, a lot of our issues with resources are self-inflicted, right? We end up losing money not because we lack the resources, but because sometimes we fail to manage resources properly. So it places us in a difficult situation. But stewardship is the proper management of resources, and we ensure that we use them for God's purpose. And when we do that, not only do we receive the blessings of God, but we are ensured that we are properly managing the resources that was entrusted to us. Thirdly, lordship. In everything that you do, every decision that you make, again, the question is, are you doing this for the glory of God? And then lastly, everything you do should be an act of worship. So when you follow these four, relationship with God, stewardship of resources, the total lordship of Jesus in your life, and everything as an act of worship, integrity will just be a byproduct of all these things. So integrity is very beneficial, and I believe that a lot of us, you know, we need to develop integrity because, as I said, in whatever field of endeavor you are in, integrity is necessary. And not only is it necessary, but it's beneficial not only to you, but to society as well. So I hope and pray that after understanding what integrity is all about, all of us would strive to develop integrity because we need people who have integrity. We need people in influential positions who have integrity. We need people with integrity to lead us. We need people with integrity to guide us and to influence society. Let's create a society where doing good is easier than doing what is wrong. And that can only happen if each one of us will develop integrity. So I hope and pray that you have learned from the webinar today. Again, thank you for this opportunity.
Thank you so much for that one, Pastor. Indeed, we really learned a lot from you every single time we hear your words and every time we came to your webinar. And I would just like to quote this one. I like what you said a while ago that when you have integrity, you increase your value. I so believe in that one. So, guys, if you really wanted to increase your value, be a man of integrity. Right? So, thank you so much for that one, Pastor. And at this juncture, I would just like to present to you the certificate of appreciation. Let me just Mamira, please do the honors.
I guess it's showing, no, I can't see it
Yes, ma'am.
on my screen.
It's
So we're presenting this certificate of appreciation. Thank you once again, Captain and Pastor Jebo Banzuelo, for giving this talk to us. Everyone, we have to know that this is a very um, good opportunity for us to listen to Pastor Jebo. He is a very sought after speaker in Manila, and it is really a privilege to have you here with us, Pastor Jebo. So once again, thank you for coming to talk to us about this topic, how to be a man of integrity. It is difficult to be people of integrity, especially now. And it's good for us to think about it and to be challenged, as what Pastor Jebo says. And I hope that you leave this seminar with a lot of thoughts in your mind on and a determination to live your life with integrity. So thank you once again, Pastor Jebo.
Thank you din po, and God bless.
All right, thank you so much, everyone. And I would like to grab this opportunity if you want to ask Pastor a question, or if you want to raise something that you would love to ask Pastor. This is the best time for you to do that. So we can have a small chit chat or conversation with Pastor, because I believe that all of you really wanted to ask question and whatnot. So please don't hesitate to comment down your name so that you will be recognized. Okay.
I have a question for Pastor. Pastor Jebo, you were saying that you were comparing people in Japan and in the Philippines. And in the Philippines, we like to create our own lines, not like Japan. When they have calamities, they seem to be able to line up properly. Why do you think this is so?
Well, part of that is the culture we have developed. You see, I think a lot of people are so self-centered. Not to discredit Filipinos, because I've seen Filipinos actually, who do things properly, but sometimes they find it difficult because culture itself is problematic. Okay, we want to be first all the time. We see this. We struggle with commuting, because instead of lining up, no, kanya-kanya, it's the survival of the fittest and the fastest. Kung sino yung pinakamagaling sumingit, siya yung makakasakay. And we struggle with that because we don't see value in following rules. In fact, dito po sa paligid namin, just this morning, I went out to throw out the trash, because it's collection day for garbage every Tuesday and Friday here in our place. And what you would notice is there's so many signs that say bawal magtapon, but you know, people, kung saan pa yung sign, dun pa nila nilalagay. And that's a common sight, I think. And part of that is because sometimes we lack the determination to do something right, simply because we are overwhelmed by those who are doing wrong. So basically, sometimes even those who are doing right, they fail because of lack of consistency. We give in to the, you know, what people do. So I would like to encourage each and every one of us. Let's be value-based, okay? Let's not go with the flow. If you think something is right, stick to it. That's the basic idea of integrity. Stick to what is right, even if it's inconvenient. And time will come when people are doing the right thing. It will become easier for us to do that. But we have to go through the process, okay, of fighting an individual battle, making sure that on our side, you know, we do what is right, what is proper. In fact, I did this with my family. Before, I also belong to those who would open up the car window and throw things outside. But we have made the decision not to do that. Okay, so I have a garbage bin inside the car, or we just throw it in a plastic bag inside the car and take it home. Okay, so I have to do it. And in fact, right now, I've noticed the change whenever I see people opening the car window and throwing things outside. You know, I used to do that, but now when I see people doing that, somehow, you know, I cannot believe that, you know, they're still doing it. So what I've noticed is that I have changed a lot. I have changed significantly. And you can experience that by being consistent with what you know what is right. And once you see the difficulty that we have imposed upon ourselves because of our lack of integrity, you will really yearn for integrity. Just like, you know, what happened in some places that were devastated by the typhoon. A lot of people came to help, but because of people failing to line up, people failing to, you know, discipline themselves in getting, in waiting for their turns and getting the relief goods, some of those who are willing to help, you know, have been turned off, and they decided to just go somewhere else. Okay, because, you know, their safety is also important. So when we see the consequence of living without integrity, I think we would be motivated to do what is right. I think with Japan, they have seen the horrors of you know, calamity after calamity, and they have seen that the better way is to have discipline in what they do. And probably, you know, because they have done this for a long time, it has become now a part of the culture that if you fail to line up, ikaw yung nakakahiya. Now, I remember one time, we went to Singapore with my family, so my wife and back then, yung daughter pa lang namin. We were trying to get on the train. Of course, Filipino mindset eh. In the Philippines, alam mo naman, yung MRT, LRT dito sa Manila, pag nabitawan mo yung anak mo, babay na forever. Okay? So it was so difficult. So I had that mindset, we have to be first. Okay, we have to be first. So when the gates opened, and then, kasi meron silang safety gate, and then of course the door of that train, and then after that, we rushed in. And we noticed that people were looking at us because apparently to them, you know, there's no reason to rush in. Walang tulakan dito. It's not like in your place probably. And then I realized that I did something, you know, normal to us Filipinos, but was unusual for them. And nahiya po talaga ako. And when I exposed myself to a better way that I saw in their place, I said to myself, when I get home, I will implement the, you know, the good experience that I had, and try to improve the situation that we have here. But again, I think it's a long way to go. It's a battle that needs to be won one person at a time. So the challenge is to change culture as a whole. We have to change individually first. When we reach critical mass, then it becomes easier.
Thank you for that.
Thank you so much for that one, Pastor, and thank you so much for that one, Ma'am Myra. I guess it's already 11:02, so I would just like to ask, I would just like to grab this opportunity as well to recognize the presence of our student facilitator, Ma'am Ses. Good morning, ma'am. And Ma'am Myra, if you wanted to say something to end this webinar.
Actually, I'd like to take this opportunity to ask another question because
Yes, ma'am, go ahead.
Pastor Jebo, you mentioned in your talk earlier that you have to order your spiritual life first before you can be a man of integrity. Can we do that? Can we do this without ordering your spiritual life?
Sorry, can you repeat the
You were
question?
saying earlier that you need to order your spiritual life first before you can become a man of integrity or woman of integrity. What if you don't order your spiritual life, because that thing takes time, no? And that's difficult. So can you just focus straight on, you know, living a life of integrity without ordering your spiritual life?
Yeah, thanks for that question. Now, the reason why I said it's important to order our spiritual life, simply because when you talk about integrity, it's all about adhering to a particular standard. So when you are unfamiliar with the standard that you need to adhere to, or if you do not know the how to adhere to that particular standard, or you do not have the motivation to adhere to a standard, then you do not develop integrity. Because the way I see integrity, it's just a byproduct. Okay? It's a byproduct. When you have issues with integrity, it's just a symptom. There is a deeper problem. So the deeper problem should be addressed. So that's why when you talk about integrity, it's very important that you ask yourself the question, what standards do I adhere to? So if you don't order your spiritual life, you get confused as to the standards. The Bible provides us with the standards of what is right and what is wrong. And these are time proven, and not only that, these are timeless standards. And not only that, the Bible also keeps on reminding us that we are not alone in this battle. You see, from time to time, because we live in this world, the world influences us a lot. Sometimes we struggle with doing what is right simply because, the world provides a counterculture. And the way to move forward is to develop a strong foundation, which is your relationship with God. And when you have that relationship, as I mentioned, integrity will be developed. If you go straight to integrity, I think what you need to ask, if you think about going straight to integrity and bypassing the spiritual process, eventually you will face a lot of difficulties. One is where do you get the standard? And secondly, what motivates you in doing that? And then thirdly, if there is no higher accountability, then we just seek what is beneficial. So in the process, we lose out. So there should be a higher accountability. If you remember Joseph from the Old Testament, despite the fact that he was given all of the opportunity to become, richer and probably more affluent in many ways, but his accountability was before God. So instead of giving in to quote and unquote opportunities, worldly opportunities, he thought of his accountability before God. And in the end, not only was God glorified with his life, but according to Genesis chapter 50, verse 20, and that's one of my favorite verses in the Old Testament, the Bible tells us that what you intended your intention to harm me was used by God to bring me to this position so that I could save the lives of many. So you see, when we have a good relationship with God, we become sensitive to his agenda, and eventually we become instruments of his work. So I think it's very important to put integrity on a solid foundation and to see integrity as a byproduct of a higher goal, which is a relationship with God.
Thank you, Pastor.
Thank you so much for the on, Pastor. Any other question? We can entertain at least one or two questions. So we have one from Orias. Good
We have
morning.
a question, yeah. Okay, would you like me to read the question?
Please do the
Okay.
honors, Pastor.
So the question is, good morning po, I have a question. Just curious how to improve integrity within ourselves. Is there any steps or a process po? Since each person has their own standards and some people don't believe any spiritual being. That's true. That's why we said it's important to adhere to a standard, okay? The problem is we get confused because of the many standards that we have today. When you talk about standards, at the end of the day, you have to ask yourself, which is the right standard? It leads to a lot of confusion because what somebody considers right may be considered wrong by another person. For example, maraming mga nang hold up, ang sasabihin nila is, mangangano kasi yung misis ko. So to them, it justifies their action simply because it provides for their need. But of course, we know that whether or not manganganak yung misis mo, yung action na yon is definitely wrong. So for you to develop integrity, the first thing that you have to keep in mind is that there should be a standard. Because integrity is all about adhering to a standard. And the reason why I'm saying that the spiritual life is important because it is God who gives us the standard on how to live. And those standards are not meant to destroy our lives or to create limitations. The purpose of that standard is to ensure that we live good lives. In fact, similar to if you have been to a swimming pool, the other side is deep. There's a shallow part. Usually, they would have a buoy or a line that would show you that if you cross that, that's too deep. Okay. Now, what's the purpose of that line? It's not to limit those who are swimming. It's making sure that those who are not very good swimmers will not cross the line and drown eventually. So the purpose of the limitation is not to limit our enjoyment, but to make sure that we enjoy within the bounds of what is right. So the same is true with God. And then secondly, how to develop integrity. So you have the standard, you have to know the standard. That's the first one. The second one is when you talk about integrity, it's all about adhering to a standard. So the question now is, what can motivate you to adhere to a particular standard? And I think the book of Timothy is a good example, especially to young people, because Timothy said, seek the fellowship of people who will encourage you to do what is right. So what that means is that you know the standard, you seek the right people that can motivate you to do what is right, and understand this, doing what is right becomes difficult when you are with wrong people. Doing what is right becomes easy if you are with the right people. So the people that you surround yourself with are very important because they can contribute either to the difficulty or to the ease of doing what is right. So that is my challenge to you. That those are simple ways and simple steps for you to develop integrity. And of course, at the end of the day, you have to go solo. Okay, what does that mean? Because integrity is not just what you do with people when people are around. It's what you do when nobody else is around. That's why accountability before God is so important. Because when nobody looks, nobody sees, and nobody knows what you're doing, your accountability is before God. And when you have that accountability, you will strive to do what is right, not because people see you, not because people know, but because ultimately your goal is to glorify God.
Thank you so much, Pastor, for that one. We have right. So yun. Any other question from you guys? You can have one more question. Okay, I think everyone is good, and may I pass the screen to our president for her closing remarks on this very fruitful webinar indeed.
Good morning again, everyone. Thank you for joining this webinar. And once again, I want to thank Pastor Jebo for gracing our webinar. And I hope that we go home today thinking about what we just heard. And it's important to live with integrity, not only because it's the right thing to do, but I think as a society, we really need um, individuals to start living with integrity. You know, we have a country that has a lot of problems, and these problems will not be solved by just one person. It will not be solved by our president alone. He needs all the help that he can gather. And it starts with us individually deciding to live with integrity. That's the only way that we can help our country. And it starts individually in your homes, in your friends, in our city, and then it goes around, you know, and then eventually that's how we can help our country. So with that, I won't say anything more, but just want to thank everyone. Thank you. Thank you for gracing this event, and hope to see you again next week for the event that Sir Dwight announced this morning. No? That will be next Friday. So once again, thank you very much, and hope that you all have a good day. Thank you once again, Pastor Jebo,
Thank
for
you.
being with us. All right, Sir Dwight.
Thank you, Myra. Thank you, everyone. Again, thank you so much, Pastor Jebo. And would like to remind you that on December 11, 10 a.m. via Google Meet